got quiet before I said my name, and I will. I'm Peter Carmichael. I am a member of the History Department here at Gettysburg College. I am also the director of the Civil War Institute, and it is my pleasure to welcome our old friends here as well as our new. I am so pleased that you have decided to come here, spend some time with us on campus for 4 days of lectures, panel discussions, and field tours, all about Reconstruction and emancipation. I think all of you who have been here will agree there really isn't anything like the educational experience here at the Civil War Institute. If you are new to the conference, you will find that you're joining a very vibrant intellectual community. I promise you that there will be no shortage of good conversation, good food, and it is my hope that you will find this experience to be a memorable one. Now, many people work behind the scenes to get lift off for this conference, and I should have mentioned to them that they needed to come, not front and center, but they needed to come out of the back room. If you could pull them out in, that would be fantastic. Many of you have had email correspondence with Allison. Allison is off to my left or to your right. Allison can defend a feeble hand raise there, Allison. As you all know, I mean, Allison's indispensable to what we do here, and very appreciative of all of her hard work and her efforts. Answering my late-night emails, changes in schedule, she's absolutely fantastic. Diane Brennan is right in the center there. Diane, let's see if you can raise your hand a little bit higher than Allison. There you go. One thing that many folks don't realize is that the Civil War Institute does a range of things, not just the conference, but that is, of course, one of our main responsibilities during the academic year. But Diane is also responsible for the Lincoln Prize. The Lincoln Prize ceremony, which is held in New York City every year. So she does a range of things, not just the conference, but also the Lincoln Prize. And she takes very good care of me. I'll tell you all a little bit. I've been on leave this year in France. All right, so we have also Jill Titus. Could you raise your hand? There you go, Jill. My left, or to the right of Jill, is Ian Isherwood. Ian, if you could raise your hand, please. Many of you know Ian, and Ian, I am very, very pleased to report, has accepted a 10-year track position in the Civil War Era Studies program here at Gettysburg College. So he'll still be around. He won't be part of the CWI family anymore, but this is a really big moment for Ian, and so if you get an opportunity, certainly wish him a congratulations. And then finally, our student worker this year is Ryan. Ryan in the red shirt. Ryan, could you raise your hand? One last member of our staff who's not arrived yet is Ashley Whitehead. Ashley will be here, I think tomorrow. All right, so there is the staff. And next. At CWI, we have a number of scholarship recipients, and we have high school scholarship recipients. I'm not going to mention them by name, but I would like those young people to stand up for just a moment. They're all, of course, congregated together. As you all know, a herd mentality sometimes takes place. I'd like to break that up here at CWI. I think one of the wonderful things is that we can get some cross-generational conversations about history. There are times that us older folks get a little down on the younger generation. We believe that they don't have a deep passion or interest in the Civil War. I think if you spend some time with these young people, you will find that they are very excited about the things that we care very deeply about. And I should add that we have on our faculty, 2 former scholarship recipients, Michael Burnett, who I don't believe is here yet, and Jason Phillips. They both were sitting where you all are sitting right now some time ago. Leslie Gordon, who is also on our faculty, she came to CWI, not as a scholarship recipient, but as a high school student. So the point being, this experience proved to be very formative for a number of prominent scholars in our field. The Hartley Fellows, Scott Hartley Fellows, have they arrived yet? It doesn't appear that they have. I will go ahead and tell you about the fellowship program. It is a very valuable one that enables public historians, people who work at Civil War sites and battlefields, to come and to get professional training here. And as you probably are aware of, funding for professional training for Park Service employees and other historians who work at public history sites, it's very, very limited. And so, in honor of Scott Hartwig was a long-time supervisory historian here at Gettysburg National Park. He also has written a very good book on Antietam, and he will be speaking to us on Sunday. He's going to be speaking on John Batchelder. Scott, I think, is everything you would want in a public historian, and many of you probably have been on battlefield tours with him. It's just truly outstanding. So it's a real honor, really, for CWI to be able to extend fellowships or scholarships in honor of Scott's just very, very important work here at Gettysburg. So the Scott Hartwig Fellows, you'll see a few of them. I think we have 3 this year, I believe. We also have the Pohanka Fellows. Are they here by chance? And we're not going to do this next year, Allison. At the end of the conference, keep happening. I don't see any of them. So we'll have another cohort of young people from Gettysburg College who receive Pohanka, what we call internships at national parks. We give in the range of 16 to 20. Gettysburg College pays for the student salary, and the national park reciprocates with free housing. These students then spend the summer on the front lines of history, giving tours, working with visitors, doing research. It's a remarkable opportunity, and it is in honor of the historian Brian Pohanka. Brian Pohanka, who passed away some years ago. His family, the Pohanka Endowment, pays for this scholarship opportunity, this internship. So you'll get an opportunity again to mix it up with some other young people. Again, I think you will be surprised, you'll be energized by the fact that these kids are so passionate about history. And I want to point out, they're not getting rich this summer. They're getting enough money to be able to get by, and they're going out there and having an unbelievable chance to be able to talk to people like you about the Civil War past. And finally, and Allison, let me know if I missed anyone, we have a few teacher scholarships this year, and those individuals, if they happen to be here, can they stand up? We have one person. We actually have more than one person. The teacher scholarships is, I'm sorry, there's some other people that stood up, I'm sorry. This is something, again, that has been long-standing with CWI, and we're able to, this year, to bring back this program, and so again, you'll have an opportunity to be able to speak to some of these teachers, and these teachers, in turn, will have an opportunity to work directly with some of our scholars. All right, the final announcement. Many of you who've been here before are familiar, seeing my family, my wife Beth, and my 2 children, Cameron and Isabel, who are twins. This past semester, we were in France together. I was on research leave. I had a fellowship at a university in Aix-en-Provence. And of course, I couldn't finish my Civil War book here in Gettysburg. I had to go all the way to France to be able to finish my book. And as you can imagine, French wine lubes mine really well. So I was a more relaxed writer in France. I've left them in France, not permanently, but I've left them in France, and they're in X right now. I'm going to return and meet them in 2 weeks. But we have had many great adventures, as you can imagine, and the thing that we've discovered, to our surprise, is that the Carmichael family in Europe, and in Vienna in particular, we are royalty, and I have proof of it. And please note that what looks like, or what I intended to look like a crown on my head, it almost looks like I'm a court jester, as you can see. And Brooke Simpson, who's maybe not here right now, that he will make a lot of cheap shots about my attire. He especially takes offense to my obsession with scarves, which I'm not wearing one now. It's far too hot for that. But note that I also was able to get my scarf from that as well. So yes, there's the Beth, of course, is in the center, and then we have Cameron and Isabel. They are very, very sorry that they're not going to be here, but I have to be honest with you all. What they miss above all else, besides their dad, is Mr. G's ice cream. If you haven't had it, you're going to get it after this, and I swear to you, even if you don't feel, I don't know, particularly excited about coming back to CWI after this, what will get you back here is Mr. G's ice cream. And my girls would walk over my carcass to get to Mr. G's ice cream. That's how much they love it, and we'll have that after the first talk. So before I introduce our first speaker, I want to extend my deep appreciation to the members of the faculty. Many of the faculty members met with Allison and me 2 years ago at the Southern Historical Conference in Atlanta. And there we mapped out this program. And as you can see, the offerings, they're incredibly diverse, and they speak to the intellectual richness of the field of Reconstruction and emancipation. It is a field, and this is, I think, a very crucial point. It is a field that cynics say holds no interest to students of the Civil War, who only care about battlefields and nothing else. While our gathering, they should quiet the critics. It is incredibly gratifying to stand here before you all and to say that the conference is sold out. And we have gathered here because we know that the story of the Civil War did not end at Appomattox. Now, don't get me wrong, we had this debate, I believe it was last year, between Dr. Gallagher and Downs about when the war really ended. And it's a debate that goes around and around and around and around, and it leads absolutely nowhere. But we can, I think, all agree that with Appomattox, that there was not a chance that a slave-holding republic would ever be resurrected again. There was not a chance that the institution of slavery would be revived in some way. But what we should also remember that many of those issues that animated the coming of the war and the war itself, that they in fact were debated, and not just debated, they were fought over in a very violent way. So if you want to see our discussions of emancipation and Reconstruction as part of the long Civil War, be my guest. But at the same time, I hope we all can agree upon the fact that what happened in 1865 at Appomattox, that it did matter. Now, we should also note that what happened after 1865 ushered in a truly revolutionary moment. A truly revolutionary moment that I think can be encapsulated in one fact. In 1857, the Supreme Court declared in the Dred Scott decision that people of African descent could not be citizens of the United States. Could not be citizens in the United States. And in less than 8 years after the crash of great military events and the revolutionary acts of runaway slaves, the 13th Amendment was passed, abolishing slavery and giving some 4 million slaves, former slaves, citizenship in the nation. Only when we place the American South on a global stage do we see that Reconstruction in the South was truly a radical moment. No other slave society that underwent emancipation extended the franchise of political rights to its former enslaved men. Now that there was tremendous pushback and violence, of course that shouldn't surprise us, but was this grand experiment, was it doomed from the start? Was the country destined to abandon the free people? Was it inevitable that terrorist groups like the Klan would arise? Was it foreordained that the Southern farmers, both black and white, that they would be impoverished in a system of sharecropping and tenant farming? And was it predestined that many ex-Confederates would return to power, ruling over a fraudulent democratic system committed to segregation and disfranchisement? During the next 4 days, we're going to have a lot of conversations, a lot of debates. We're going to puzzle through all these difficult questions about a society where power was truly up for grabs. And it is my hope, that we won't frame answers around the binary of whether Reconstruction was either a success or failure. Rather, it is my hope that you will leave this conference seeing in Reconstruction, despite its grotesque violence and its horrible tragedies, that events could have what? They could have taken many courses. And that above all else, in studying Reconstruction, that one should discover that there is no such thing as inevitability in the historical process. That sets us up for our first speaker, David Silkenat. Is David here? Oh, good. Someone's here. Really? All right. David currently serves as a lecturer in American history at the University of Edinburgh in Scotland. He teaches a wide range of courses in Civil War and Reconstruction, Civil War memory, and the U.S. South. After beginning his career as a high school teacher in Florida, he earned his PhD at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. He taught at the University of North Carolina State University, and there he published his first book. It is a superb one, Moments of Despair, Suicide, Divorce, and Debt in Civil War era North Carolina. It explores the shifting sentiments, both black and white, toward suicide, debt, and divorce in the post-Civil War South. This book received a number of awards. He's got a new book that's coming out. His new book is entitled Driven from Home, North Carolina's Civil War Refugees, and should be out in October. Published by the University of North Carolina Press. I'm so pleased that he is here. In fact, his son was a scholarship recipient 2 years ago, so we know the Silkenat family very well. We're thrilled that you're going to come back. He's going to be speaking about Southern honor and Southern defeat. Southern honor is tossed around a fair amount. Usually it conjures up the idea of maybe dueling and shooting each other, and certainly a much more complex ethic. And I'm pleased that David is here to explore that topic with us. David Silkenat.
Begin by thanking Pete for putting together for inviting me and putting together a tremendous program. I'm looking forward to this week probably as much as you are. And I also want to thank the entire staff here, especially Allison, for helping with all the logistics. Shortly after Lee surrendered Appomattox, Union Colonel John T. Sprague received an unusual mission from General John Pope. He was to travel down the Mississippi from Pope's headquarters in St. Louis to Louisiana, and from there travel up the Red River to Shreveport, where he was to demand Confederate General Edmund Kirby Smith's surrender, using the Appomattox terms as a template. The trip from St. Louis to the Confederate Trans-Mississippi capital took nearly a month, far longer than he anticipated. Insisting upon delivering Pope's message in person, Sprague was repeatedly delayed en route before he received permission to enter Confederate lines. Crossing into rebel territory on May 8th, Sprague traveled upriver via steamboat, sharing the vessel with Confederate General Simon Buckner, who had surrendered Fort Donelson, of course, in 1862, and now served as Kirby Smith's chief of staff. Also on board were several exchanged or paroled soldiers from Lee's army, who are now headed home. Sprague hoped that Pope's letter and developments over the past month would make Kirby Smith's paths forward clear. Lee had surrendered at Appomattox on April 9th. Johnson had surrendered at Sherman at Bennett Place, North Carolina on April 26th. And General Canby had accepted the surrenders of Generals Cobb, Taylor, and Maury in the ensuing weeks. Sprague had known both Kirby Smith and Buckner from the old army, and expected them to bend the logic of events. Kirby Smith read Pope's message closely. Although he anticipated its contents, he refused to respond immediately, explaining that he was scheduled to meet with Western Confederate governors in Marshall, Texas, 20 miles west of Shreveport, and asked Sprague to wait while he consulted with civil authorities. Before he left, Kirby Smith, quote, admitted the force of recent events and Sprague saw in him, quote, a warm and benevolent desire to avoid the future further effusion of blood and the infliction of needless suffering. When he returned a week later, however, Kirby Smith told Sprague that he could not surrender. In a lengthy memorandum for Colonel Sprague, Kirby Smith articulated his reasoning. He argued that my army was menaced only from a distance, and it is large and well supplied, and an extensive country full of resources. Unlike Lee's worn and exhausted army surrounded at Appomattox, his force faced no immediate military threat and had ample food and resources. Considering their different circumstances, the Appomattox terms, Kirby Smith argued, were, quote, not such that a soldier could honorably accept. He explained that an officer can honorably surrender his command when he has resisted to the utmost of his power. Given the condition of his army, he reasoned that it cannot be said the duty imposed upon me has been fulfilled to the utmost extent required by the laws of honorable warfare. Unlike some of his subordinates who harbored fantasies about the Trans-Mississippi Confederacy continuing to fight indefinitely, Kirby Smith did not hold unrealistic expectations about the military prospects before him. However, since he was in a stronger military position than Lee, Kirby Smith believed he deserved better terms. Furthermore, he interpreted the federal government's insistence on the Appomattox terms as an indication they intended to, quote, humiliate a people who have contended gallantly. Kirby Smith proposed alternative terms, including immunity from prosecution, a full restoration of political rights, and the freedom to leave the country unhindered. Any less liberal terms, Kirby Smith argued, would be contrary to the laws which custom has made binding among nations and military men, and would engender continued resistance and rebellion. The word that appears over and over again in Kirby Smith's memorandum to Sprague is honor. His defeat was inevitable, but he wanted to ensure that when defeat came, it came without the necessity of him sacrificing his honor. What I'd like to do today is look at how honor shaped the contours of the Confederacy's final months, how it influenced the transition from wartime to peacetime, and how it affected the major questions of Reconstruction and afterwards. For men of the Civil War era, the idea of honor possessed a gravitas and levels of meaning that have now largely disappeared. For them, honor was something to be prized, cultivated, and fiercely guarded. If you read the diaries and correspondence of men in the 1840s, 50s, and 60s, you will often see a preoccupation with honor that borders on obsession. For all the importance they attach to honor, however, precisely defining it can be difficult. To appropriate Supreme Court Justice Potter Stewart's definition of obscenity, they knew honor when they saw it. A few broad generalizations can be made, however. First, honor was primarily about how one was judged by the outside community. The community established a set of social paradigms the man of honor must uphold. Honor was fundamentally social in nature. One could not be a man of honor alone on a desert island. Second, honor was interwoven with masculinity. As Ed Ayers has observed, while women could be venerated for their virtue, only men could have honor. Third, the meaning of honor, the precise rules and values that men needed to uphold, varied based on both geography and social class. For young men attending Harvard, for instance, you can see some young Harvard undergraduates from the 1850s, honor was obtained through self-discipline and restraint. A man of honor was one who was in control of his emotions and the world around him. Conversely, poor immigrants in New York's 5 Points might demonstrate their honor through their prowess in a tavern brawl or at the gambling table. Some of the most interesting and controversial scholarship on honor in the Civil War era has looked at the way in which honor functioned in the South. Within the context of a slave society, honor took on a particular valence. When the master-slave dynamic functioned as the dominant cultural metaphor, honor became fundamentally intertwined with mastery. Men of honor were masters, masters over their slaves, masters over their households, and masters within their community. To challenge a white man's honor was to symbolically make him into a slave. Because the metaphorical stakes were so high, Southern white men responded viscerally to any challenge to their honor. Even minor slights required an immediate and bold response. Some historians have linked this profound obsession with honor with some of the distinct features of Southern society. Honor, for instance, helps to explain why dueling, which had essentially died out in the rest of the Atlantic world by 1800, continued in the South decades later. And while the duel remained the purview of the planter class, poor white Southerners who were no less invested in the culture of honor. Like their planter counterparts, poor whites responded to challenges up to their honor with violence, often in the form of what one historian has referred to as rough and tumble brawls. The flip side of honor was shame. Failing to uphold one's honor had significant social ramifications. Dishonorable men were ostracized from polite society and effectively socially dead. The greatest fear of Southern planters was they would be unmasked. The facade of honor that they worked so hard to project would crumble, and they would become socially marginalized. And the slide here we see is from Florida, where one Florida politician feels like he has been insulted by another politician who he claims has not given him the due which is he needs as an honorable man. When the war came, honor helped drive men into military service in both the North and the South. There was no greater venue than combat to showcase and enhance one's honor. Reading soldiers' diaries and correspondence before their first battle, their greatest hope was that they would fight honorably, and for many of them their greatest fear was not that they would die on the battlefield, but they would behave dishonorably. For Northerners and Southerners alike, honor extended beyond the individual and concentric circles. They valued and defended honor not only on a personal basis, but they also sought to protect the honor of their families, their community, their state, region, and country. When the war came, soldiers manifested similar affinities when it came to protecting their personal honor as a soldier and the honor of their regiment, their army, and their nation. Their preoccupation with honor helps to explain why soldiers invested so much emotional energy in material manifestations of their honor, such as regimental flags, and were willing to die to protect them. By January 1865, most outside observers concluded that Confederate defeat was inevitable. To be sure, many Confederate soldiers, whom Jason Phillips has dubbed die-hard rebels, maintained that Confederate victory was just around the corner, even when all the evidence seemed to suggest otherwise. A sentiment that Confederate President Jefferson Davis appeared to have shared. For those who saw the writing on the wall, however, they began to calculate how they could end the war without bringing dishonor on themselves and their country. Was it possible, they asked themselves, to be defeated without sacrificing their honor? Abraham Lincoln was cognizant that defeating the Confederacy and bringing the war to a conclusion required appealing to Confederate senses of honor. If they could be persuaded that ending the war was more honorable than continuing to fight, thousands of lives could be saved. When Lincoln met with Grant and Sherman aboard the River Queen at City Point in March 1865, he instructed them to offer generous terms that would not compromise Confederate honor. Let them surrender and go home, Lincoln told them. They will not take up arms again. Let them all go, officers and all. Let them have their horses with them to plow with, and if you like, their guns to shoot crows with. Give them the most liberal and honorable of terms. Many Confederates also believed that a quick end to the war would be the best way to protect their honor. Foremost among them was Confederate Secretary of War John C. Breckinridge. Convinced in early 1865 that Confederate defeat was inevitable, Breckinridge argued that, quote, the Confederacy should not be captured in fragments, but we should surrender as a government, and we may thus maintain the dignity of our cause and secure the respect of our enemies and the best terms for our soldiers. He recognized that surrender carried some risk, particularly for those who might face prosecution for treason. Nonetheless, Breckinridge maintained that, quote, this has been a magnificent effort. In God's name, let it not terminate in a farce. Jefferson Davis, however, steadfastly refused to consider any outcome short of a complete Confederate independence. Davis's intransigence grew both out of a stubborn faith in Confederate destiny and his belief that his moral and political obligations to his office precluded surrender when it resulted in his country's demise. As Davis told one associate, the Confederate Constitution does not allow him to treat for his own suicide. When it finally came time for Confederates to lay down their arms, questions of honor were at the forefront. Confederates hoped to surrender in such a way as to minimize any lasting shame, while Union officials, cognizant of how dearly rebels protected their honor, sought to minimize the dishonor that surrender would entail. When we look at Grant's conduct in Appomattox, it is clear that he understood how profoundly Confederates held their honor, and went to great lengths not to offend Lee or his men. He wanted them to see that defeat did not necessarily mean they were without honor, and that reunification could take place without a lasting shame looming over their heads. Grant's understanding of the role honor had in the Army of Northern Virginia helps to explain why he did not demand Lee's sword, for instance, or why he ordered his men to halt any celebrations that might offend or embarrass the defeated Confederates. In his memoirs, Grant noted that, quote, "When news of the surrender first reached our lines, our men commenced firing a salute of 100 guns in honor of the victory. I at once sent word, however, to have it stopped. The Confederates were now our prisoners, and we did not want to exult over their downfall." This illustration is probably the first published illustration of the meeting of Lee and Grant at Appomattox. It's published by Currier and Ives. They've published several different versions of it. It appears to be for sale in New York less than a month after the surrender. For those of you who have been to Appomattox or who have seen the actual artifacts in the Smithsonian or read the surrender, recognize that almost everything about this image is wrong. They didn't sit at the same table. The chairs look like, it's not what the wallpaper looked like. Grant's uniform is wrong. There's lots of details about this that are completely off. What I like about this image, though, is I think it sort of tells us something about the way the war ended, or at least one version of the way the war ended. Here are two men sitting at a table having a conversation as equals. And they're having a conversation as equals at the point in which they are the most unequal. Lee's army is broken, Grant's army is not. If they walk out of this table without an agreement, bad things are going to happen to Lee's army. But here, at least, for this moment, they are meeting as equals. This, I think, is a more accurate depiction of what happened. This is a painting which is now housed at the Virginia Historical Society, painted around 1920. I often show this painting to my students and ask them, especially these are British students who may not know the Civil War iconography as well as people in the audience, who's the victor in this painting? And if you didn't know that Grant is the victor, you would have thought that Lee is the person who's going to walk out of here cheering. I think it says something about what Confederates thought, or former Confederates or Southerners thought about the end of the war several decades later. The magnanimous tone expressed by Grant and other Union generals may have had unintended consequences. Some Confederates went home believing that since their honor was intact, they could continue to proclaim Confederate values even after the Confederacy itself ceased to exist, and that surrender did not necessarily mean defeat. As Confederate General Richard Taylor, son of President Zachary Taylor, Jefferson Davis's brother-in-law, told a subordinate, "You will explain to your troops that a surrender will not be the consequence of any defeat, but is simply, so far as we are concerned, yielding upon the best terms and with the preservation of our military honor to the logic of events." Even more disturbingly, Alabamian Cullen A. Battle noted that Appomattox was, quote, "not the surrender of principles that no honorable man could bear, but a surrender which honor was earned and the moral grandeur of the South rose to heights unknown before." Returning home after the surrender, Cullen established the Knights of White Carnation, a terrorist organization that predated the Klan. Although Appomattox marked the beginning of the end for the Confederate nation, many rebels left with their commitment to Confederate values of white supremacy and Southern distinctiveness intact and reinforced. At Appomattox and at the surrenders that followed at Bennett Place, Citronelle, and other sites, Union and Confederate generals used a shared vocabulary to distinguish between honorable and dishonorable surrender that had been established at the beginning of the war. Major Robert Anderson was praised as the hero of Fort Sumter for his bravery prior to surrender, only capitulating after suffering from heavy bombardment and with no prospect for victory or escape. Other officers, such as David Twiggs, Isaac Lynn, and Dixon Miles, were vilified when they surrendered their men prematurely, and in Twiggs' case, probably treasonably. This paradigm of the honorable surrender helps to explain why Kirby Smith could not bring himself to surrender under the same terms that had been acceptable to Robert E. Lee. Lee, like Robert Anderson, found himself in a position where continuing to fight would produce only further effusion of blood, and that phrase shows up over and over again in surrender negotiations. Kirby Smith had not yet reached that threshold where he could reasonably order his men to stack arms. In his comparative study of defeat, Wolfgang Sleepenbush argues that one of the most unusual features of the Civil War was how quickly Southerners developed a rationale to explain defeat. He notes that most nations usually take a generation before a consensus narrative develops about why and how they lost. But Confederates seem to arrive at a common explanation almost as soon as the war is over. As historian Michael O'Brien has observed, well, certainly few cultures are better prepared ideologically for the disaster of war. Many explanations have been posited for this. My current personal favorite, which O'Brien and others have endorsed, is that the Southern obsession with Scotland helps to explain why narratives of honorable defeat came so quickly. Go with me on this. Like Scotland, Southerners saw themselves as a distinctive region within a larger political union. Voraciously reading the novels of Walter Scott and the poetry of Robert Burns, Southerners had a ready vocabulary to describe how one could fight, lose decisively, and yet remain heroic and honorable. That's basically the entire narrative of Scottish history. Mark Twain was overstating the case when he claimed that the Civil War would not have happened if Southerners had not read Walter Scott's novels. But the Southern obsession with Scotland, which is everywhere once you start to look for it, may have helped to help them understand how defeat and honor were not irreconcilable. One of the earliest articulations of an explanation for Confederate defeat came in the form of Lee's farewell address at Appomattox. On the evening of April 9th, the same day that he surrendered to Grant, Lee assigned David Charles Marshall with the inevitable task: how to concisely and sympathetically explain the surrender and thank the troops for their commitment and sacrifice. When, by 10 a.m. the next morning, Marshall had not yet completed the address, Lee sequestered him in his personal ambulance until he finished, posting an orderly outside so that he would not be disturbed. When Marshall finished his draft, Lee pruned it to a concise 181 words that would become something of a sacred text for veterans of the Army of Northern Virginia. And here we see an early copy of Lee's order, General Order Number 9, and then later a reproduction which was reproduced many, many times in the 150 years since. Lee praised them for their sacrifice over 4 long years of war. Their defeat had come not from any deficiency on their part, but from overwhelming numbers and resources. They had fought honorably, and their defeat did not tarnish their honor one iota. They could return home with their heads held high. One of the conspicuous features of Lee's farewell address is the absence of a scapegoat. For Lee, the Union's superior resources were the beginning and end of his explanation for defeat. Other Confederates, however, did seek to place blame. While many committed Lee's words to memory, they tried to forget what General M. Jeff Thompson told his men when he surrendered them in Jacksonport, Arkansas. Unlike Lee's written farewell address, which was copied by clerks and distributed to corps commanders who disseminated it through the Army, Thompson chose to address his troops in person. On June 5th, he told nearly 5,000 Confederate soldiers, "I now come to surrender you, and hope you will make better citizens than you have soldiers." Thompson claimed they'd been defeated because they lacked the honor to fight bravely. "I know there are some gentlemen here, and I know there are some damn sneaky, cowardly dogs." Not unsurprisingly, many of Thompson's soldiers rejected this claim, but they were without honor, and one pleaded with Thompson to talk to us like gentlemen, sir. At the outburst, Thompson doubled down, threatening to whip the next man to interrupt him. And not unsurprisingly, Thompson's soldiers left the surrender feeling embittered and angry that their commander had challenged their honor at the moment of their defeat. Whether they were praised like Lee's troops or blamed like Thompson's, Confederate soldiers had to return home to confront the material reality of defeat. For these men, their defining experience is that everything turned out other than they had hoped. They had gone off to fight believing that they would return victorious. The degree to which the return home forced them to confront their failure varied tremendously. While the whole Confederacy faced defeat, destruction, I think as we all know, was distributed unevenly. Some soldiers were lucky enough to return home unscathed, resuming their pre-war life with little interruption. Many more, however, found the transition to peacetime did not come easily, and they could see their failures all around them. Some returned home to find that their farms had been destroyed. Physically and emotionally disabled veterans had to cope with the fact that their bodies could no longer do what they once did. Soldiers who had lost limbs worried they would be unable to work or support their families. Thousands more suffered from persistent ailments brought on by 4 years of hard soldiering, chronic diarrhea, rheumatism, and dysentery. Debilitating conditions that made resuming a normal life extraordinarily difficult, if not impossible. Others had injuries that were not visible to the eye, but caused former soldiers to be committed to insane asylums by the droves. As the South experienced what one North Carolina newspaper described as a suicide epidemic among its veterans. To be sure, the trauma of war exacted a heavy price on both Union and Confederate soldiers. But Northerners could at least gain some solace from the fact that their sacrifice had contributed to victory, while former rebels could only look down at their empty sleeve and be reminded of their defeat. Defeat also brought uncertainty. Confederates had a clear vision of what victory would mean. They knew that they would have their independence, and slavery, white supremacy would be maintained. Defeat opened up a whole range of possible futures, many of which former Confederates dreaded. When Union officials talked in the summer of 1865 of making treason odious, what did that mean? Would they be imprisoned? Would they lose their lands as they had lost their slaves? What power would they have at the ballot box? Ultimately, what badges of dishonor would the Union make them wear as a consequence of defeat? For men of honor, such uncertainty was almost as bad as being unmasked. If one could not control the present or the future, how can one claim to be a master? Some former Confederates could not live with this looming uncertainty. Fearing that what would happen if he were taken into federal hands, Florida Governor John Milton killed himself in April 1865, proclaiming that, quote, death would be preferable to reunion. So too did Virginian Edmund Ruffin. If ever there was somebody who was an embodiment of the Southern Code of Honor, it was Ruffin. A prominent antebellum fire eater, Ruffin had gone to Charleston in April 1861 to witness and participate in the bombardment of Fort Sumter. On June 17, 1865, Ruffin, supposedly draped in the Confederate flag, shot himself rather than face the dishonor of living under Union occupation, proclaiming in his diary his unmitigated hatred to Yankee rule. And here we see Ruffin in his uniform and the last page from his diary. We read there where he talks about his unmitigated hatred for Yankee rule. Diane Somerville tells me, by the way, this bit about wrapping himself in the flag probably didn't happen, but was invented by one of Ruffin's descendants. But it's too good a part of the story to leave it out entirely. Confederate nationalists like Ruffin could only see ruin in a future without slavery and Southern independence. While few Southerners followed his example by ending their lives, many felt that this was the overwhelming dishonor of defeat. For instance, one Virginia soldier, upon hearing of Lee's surrender, noted in his diary, if true, is indeed a death blow to our cause and the state, perhaps the whole Confederacy. I cannot describe my feelings on this sad occasion. This is really awful. What an immense loss of life and property, and all for naught. And what is to be our future doom? Some of those who felt dishonored by defeat believed that they would only regain their honor through violence. They could not respond violently against Union soldiers, but they could target recently emancipated African Americans. Many former Confederates saw their honor slipping away with every advance made by their former slaves. Because of the complex way in which honor and white supremacy were intertwined, they interpreted black activism, ranging from building their own churches and schools to political mobilizations, as a direct affront to white supremacy and to their honor. Fresh from mathematics, North Carolinian Julian Carr boasted, his words, that he horsewhipped a Negro wench until her skirts hung in shreds because she had publicly insulted and maligned a Southern lady. And while white Southerners like Carr did not need much justification to prompt violence against African Americans, the shame of defeat and the lingering culture of honor provided a framework for racial violence and Reconstruction. Violence that erupted in the Memphis and New Orleans massacres of 1866 and prompted the foundation of the Klan, a terrorist organization committed to defending the honor of the South. Viewed from this perspective, the political and social struggles of Reconstruction drew upon white Southerners' profound sense of dishonor brought upon by defeat. Only by violently resisting and rebuilding white supremacy in a post-war context could they hope to restore their honor. Rebuilding their honor also helped form the core of the lost cause, the robust mythology that helps to sustain the white South. The name Lost Cause came, as I imagine most of you know, from an 1866 history written by Richmond journalist Edward Pollard. A pro-slavery ideologue, he had in 1859 written a book advocating the reopening of the African slave trade. Pollard saw in the Confederacy the embodiment of his values and aspirations. Although often critical of the Davis administration, Pollard was a true believer in the righteousness of the Confederate cause and was convinced that Confederate victory was inevitable. When the Davis administration fled Richmond in April 1865, Pollard remained behind and watched the city burn. And according to the New York Times, berated the occupying Union Army by putting on a, quote, very bold front and talking rather defiantly. When he came to explain Confederate defeat in his book, Pollard picked up on many of the themes Lee had suggested in his farewell address. The South, he argued, had manifested greater virtue and valor in the late war. The exhibitions of generalship, chivalry, humanity, and all the noble sentimentalism that properly belongs to state of war has been largely on the Confederate side, he said. The defeat of the Confederacy occurred largely because of the superiority of Union numbers, although Pollard also placed significant blame at the feet of Jefferson Davis. Moreover, he argued that defeat did not dishonor the South. Even though the Confederacy was defeated, the honor of their men and their cause had not. The Confederates have gone out of this war, Pollard observed, with the proud, secret, deathless, dangerous consciousness that they are the better men. Pollard's pronouncement that defeat did not mean dishonor had long legs. More than 50 years later, the dedication of the Unity Monument had been placed at the site of Johnston's surrender. Julian Carr, who I mentioned earlier, who had boasted about whipping an African-American woman after Appomattox, delivered a speech entitled Peace with Honor. He told the audience that no Confederate soldier has ever surrendered or been asked to surrender the principles for which he fought. Defeat, he argued, had brought only honor to the Confederacy. We lost, he told them, but we won. Thank you. Okay, so Pete tells me everyone needs to come to the microphone if they have questions.
Al Mackey from Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania. Did you notice any discernible difference between the post-war reactions of the police veterans who had last order and Thompson's veterans who were insulted by him? Did that carry over into Reconstruction?
Oh, well, I think, it's hard to follow each of them specifically, but, Lee's status among his soldiers only was elevated after his conduct at Appomattox. If you read their post-war accounts of being there and seeing him, they're overwhelmingly glowing. Whereas Thompson, as you would imagine, they didn't have any nice things to say about him, one way or the other. The extent to which that call carried down into actually what they did later is very difficult, I think, to ascertain. It's a good question.
John Lustrier from Chicago, Illinois. This is a vaguely formed question, so forgive me. I work at Harvest Ferry National Historical Park, and we get a lot of visitors when we tell them about how these soldiers that surrendered there. They're paroled, and they're sort of largely left to their own devices, and they're eventually exchanged for Confederate soldiers. And people, they walk away from that story, they're like, man, I guess honor really meant a lot more back then than it does now. And that's sort of like their main takeaway. And I thought this was a fascinating talk. And so I'm not sure exactly what I'm asking, but like, is there more that visitors should take away about 19th century honor?
Well, so you're talking about this very interesting period in the history of the war, in which they had a prisoner exchange system, and this is mostly in sort of mid-1862 through mid-1863. And the way it worked essentially was that after you were captured in battle or captured in surrender, like at Harper's Ferry, you would be within 10 days, you'd be paroled on your honor not to fight again until you were exchanged for an equal number of soldiers on the opposite side. And it appears that 99% of soldiers on both sides upheld this, that when they said, I pledged on my honor that I am not going to fight until I've been exchanged. I have not been exchanged yet, therefore I'm not going to fight. They actually pushed back sometimes when their officer said, oh, maybe we want you to go fight against Native Americans in the West. He said, no, we're not supposed to fight, we're not going to do that. And I think that speaks to the way in which soldiers on both sides value their honor. In fact, that kind of system would work. I can't think of another war in which you would parole the enemy soldiers and tell them, promise not to fight again until we exchange you. We trust you. I can't think of another war in which that happens with that number of soldiers.
David Perlin from Connecticut. You explained very well the very sensitive nature of Lincoln in the North in terms of awareness of the importance of honor and dictating surrender terms to try to not be overly aggressive in that way. Could that have been a mistake, do you think, in terms of encouraging later some of this horsewhipping and lost cause kind of stuff that sort of followed?
Counterfactuals are always fun because you can answer, any answer works. I think the alternative, though, if you imagine had Lincoln gone and told Grant, told Sherman, push for really hard terms, that would have made it that much harder for Lee to surrender, for Johnson to surrender, for these various other Confederates to surrender. The war would have lasted months longer. Thousands of lives would have been lost. So doing the calculus there on what's, the short-term benefits, the long-term effects, I think it's very hard to do.
Thank you.
Hi, Kurt Simpson. I'm going to follow up on that question, therefore. Peter Carmichael, without his scarf, indicated that we shouldn't talk about issues of inevitability, that there are all these other choices. But what you're indicating here, in fact, is that whether or not respecting the right of Confederates to save face at the end of the war has simply promoted a spirit of resistance, and on the other hand, not to disregard that imperative would in fact embitter Confederates even more. So this does open up the question of, well, then what kind of war termination strategy would have led to a much more compliant ex-Confederate citizenry when it came to the objectives of the conflict realized during Reconstruction?
Sure. I think Confederates responded, if you look at the individual soldiers, they responded to surrender in Appomattox and Bentonville. They responded in different ways. If you look at Lee's army in the days before Appomattox, some of them leave because they determine the war is over and they're worried about what happened were they to surrender. Some of them leave saying, I don't want to surrender, I'm going to go join Johnston's army, I'm going to somehow make it to Texas and continue to fight. And if you look at what happens in Texas, a part of Kirby Smith's army says, even though everyone else has surrendered, we're not going to surrender, we're going to go off to Mexico, we'll fight for somebody in Mexico, and they aren't quite sure who they're going to fight for, but they'll figure they'll fight for somebody and regain their honor that way. On the other hand, I think many soldiers responded to the end of the Confederate soldiers responded to the end of the war with relief that the war had ended, that they could go home, that this cause, which I think many of them realized was doomed months earlier, that was they were able to have a peaceful and relatively easy transition. I'd have a hard time figuring out what Lincoln could have done and what Grant could have done differently that would have yielded a better result. I think invariably when you are dealing with an end of the war, you have to be very careful about trying to make sure that you're not giving away the victory, that you're not making the victory worth nothing. But on the other hand, I think trying, especially in a civil war where you're trying to unite with the former enemy as citizens, offering an open hand is probably the best way to do that. And I think that's was the essence of Lincoln's policy and Grant's policy.
Yeah, Justin Clark, African Vermont. We talked about honor and the KKK and terror that they came down the South. Are there any examples of Southerners acting in what we would consider an honorable way and defending African-American rights or trying to talk to KKK?
I think if you look at the South after the war, you do have obviously the figures who decide that they're going to sort of challenge black freedom in any way they can, whether it's the challenge black freedom through enacting black codes or through terrorist organizations like the Klan. You do have lots of white Southerners, though, former Confederates, who recognize that the end of the war actually had some consequences and the best strategy forward was not to resist emancipation, but to try to figure out a way to embrace it. For more details, I would actually refer you to Elaine Parsons' really excellent new book on the Klan, which only came out a few months ago. I think will sort of answer that question in far more detail than I have time for here.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Bob Romer from Massachusetts. You place tremendous emphasis, almost exclusive emphasis, on honor as a cause of all the horrors of racial violence and reaction during Reconstruction. It seems to me that's kind of oversimplified.
I would agree.
What about?
I mean, in limited time, I was using that as a lens for helping to explain some of it. A multi-causal explanation for violence and Reconstruction is probably a more accurate one.
I think as you overlook simple racism and desire for power and everything else.
I think those things are fundamentally connected, though. I think the way in which they thought about honor, the way in which they thought about race, the way in which they thought about power, those, I think, in the minds of many white Southerners in the mid-19th century are so connected ideas that distinguishing them, I think, is almost impossible. So I agree with you that what I'm doing here is taking a particular slice here to try to explain some of the features of Reconstruction. But we have a whole week here to understand Reconstruction. So,
Yes.
Hi, I'm Lindsay Reynolds from California. And to tie a little bit off of that last question, you talked a little bit about white superiority being tied to honor. Was there any significant difference in the reactions of poor white Southerners versus flatland slave owners?
So one of the ways in which, if you think about the antebellum South, one of the ways in which slave owners appealed to non-slave owners and got them to support slavery as a political institution was they told them, look, you are in some ways equal to us because you are white. That as long as there are slaves, they will be the mudsill of society, and we as white people will be men of honor and be the dominant political and economic and social race in the South. And therefore, you as a poor white Southerner, somebody who doesn't own slaves, you should support us and support slavery even if you don't own slaves yourself, even if it may not be in your immediate economic best interest to do so. And I think that those ideologies of racial solidarity continued during the war and continued after the war. It helps to explain why, for instance, so many non-slave holding whites were eager to fight for the Confederacy. And I can help explain much of what happens after the war, too. Sir.
Louis Caban from Media, Pennsylvania. This question is about the Indians who fought for the Confederacy.
Sure.
Stan Wattie was the general who surrendered the last of the Confederate forces, and he was out west. So how did the Indians, did they have this sense of honor? Do you know anything about that?
So, he, I believe, is a Cherokee? Correct me if I'm wrong. All right. So, if you look at the Cherokee, what the Cherokee did in the 1830s and early 1820s and 1830s is, to a large extent, they had already assimilated into white Southern culture. That is to say that, the strategy the Cherokee embraced, considering white settlement in the South, was to try to assimilate to the extent that they could, whether that's religiously, whether that's in their naming practices. Think about some of the important Cherokee chiefs of this period, a guy named John Ross, which is about as non-Cherokee sounding a name as you can imagine, and owning slaves, right? So many of the Cherokee are slave owners. And obviously that strategy didn't work out so well for them in the short term. We can think about the Trail of Tears, but they had assimilated far more than most Native Americans to Southern white culture. And I think that's part of the reason why the Confederacy sought their aid in the war. And I think it's part of the way, so I think they're sharing a similar, at least, moral framework to other Southerners in that respect.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Robertson, and I'm from Reed, North Carolina. I personally believe that this idea of Southern honor still kind of continues on in the South today. And I was wondering if you could answer why and how that continues, and what are the positive and negative effects of that?
Oh, jeez.
Or like a short overview.
My expertise is in the 19th century, not the 21st. So I would say that if you're looking for continuities between the South and the 19th century and the South today, I think if one looks at the amount of violence in the South, the preoccupation with firearms, for instance, I think some of that can be tied, even if it's only in a sort of tangential way, to Southern ideas about honor in the 19th century that have survived. Thinking about the honor of one's family and these kinds of ideas that I think are still present, at least in some parts of the South today. So, I'm very hesitant to draw any direct connections between events yesterday and events 150 years ago, but I think you touched on something that is probably there. There is some remnants of the Southern culture of honor that remains. Luckily, there aren't that many duels anymore, but thank you.
David Rosen from Alexandria, Virginia. To what extent was the culture of honor shared through the military, given that both sides, senior military leadership came from
Sure. Well, I think one of the things they taught at West Point is honor. And I think one of the reasons why Grant and Lee and Sherman and all these guys have a common vocabulary about honor is their common military service. And if you look at most of the Marine generals, I think as all of you know, on both sides, were trained at West Point or trained in military academies that base their curriculum on West Point. And therefore, I think some of that common experience about what it means to be an officer explains why they're able to share this common vocabulary about when can someone surrender honorably and when can one not surrender honorably. And you can imagine this happens all the time. If you think about Fort Sumter, you've got Anderson inside the fort, Beauregard, his former student, outside the fort. They're having these letters back and forth. They're sharing a common military experience, a common experience in the Army, and a common experience at West Point. So I think that's a huge part of why they're able to sort of speak with the same language.
My name is Aaron. I'm from California. Do you think that the honor that a soldier, like a lower ranking soldier, felt was brought upon that soldier by a higher ranking commander, or do you think that it was more based on the individual's ideas?
So honor, I think, at least the way that I formulate today, is primarily about how one is seen by one's community. And so I think for an individual soldier, that's what other soldiers in your regiment thought about you. If they thought you fought bravely, that was of tremendous importance. Right? But recognition from superior officers about your bravery or your conduct or your honor, I think, was very important to soldiers as well. So if they had a conversation with Lee, for instance, they would tell that story over and over again for the rest of their lives. And sort of conversely, I think a lot of soldiers felt a great deal of honor and pride in whoever their commanding officer was. Soldiers who fought with Lee were extraordinarily proud to have fought under him. Soldiers who fought under other generals were somewhat less proud about who they were. So I think it works in a fairly complex way about how an individual determines how well their honor is won. Thank you. I guess we have one last question.
I'm Sean McGarry from Turner's Soldiers. I was wondering, after the war with the reintroduction of Confederate states into the Union, how competing senses of honor between the North and the South played a role in the politics of both the country as a whole. With the reintroduction of the Confederacy and Congress, how some of these better reforms in the Reconstruction period came about.
Geez, the hardest question for last. So I think there are debates that are going on in the North about, from the beginning of Reconstruction, really throughout Reconstruction, about how much they're going to make Union victory mean something. How much they're going to make the badges of dishonor, if you will, how much you're going to make those stick on former Confederates. So when the Confederates elect representatives to Congress in the fall of 1865, the fact that the Union representatives say, no, we're not going to recognize these new members of Congress. How much you're going to make the responsibility for the war rest upon Southerners' shoulders. So if you think about the burdens placed upon white Southerners, for instance, by the 14th Amendment and by military Reconstruction, I think some of that is in large part an effort, part of this debate, the outcome of a debate about how much you want to dishonor former Confederates and how difficult that's going to make reintegration of the country. Thank you.
All right, if you all can just sit tight for a moment. Allison is going to be coming to